What's the worst punishment you ever received as a child? My mom found out my sister was suicidal, so she locked my sister in her room with literally nothing but a blanket and maybe an air mattress. She was only let out to use the restroom. Food and clothes were brought up to her and then taken when she was finished. My mom told me about this when I was about 8 or 9. I'm 19 now, and I have never and will never tell her about any of my mental health issues for fear of my life. Yes, leave a suicidal person alone with their thoughts for however long. And a blanket. My grandparents beating my mother in front of me for me talking to her. I was in their custody and my mother was an addict who they didn't want around, and she kept trying to call and come see me. So she came over, and my grandparents beat her, broke her jaw and nose, and said it was my fault for talking to her. I was 7. My mother was an addict, no surprises there. Your grandparents sound like shit. Ironically, my grandmother was also an alcoholic and pillhead as well. And yeah, I have way more worse stories lol. I was driven about 30 minutes outside of my city to an isolated, large, and creepy looking building, which I was told was an orphanage. I was given the choice of telling the truth and admitting to something I had not done, or being left there. I'm 38 and still think about this from time to time. Update, not to excuse what they did, but my mum and dad both had terrible upbringings with abusive parents. My dad was full of anger and my mum was rather weak and full of shame. I started therapy about 5 years ago and was reaching a point where I was going to decide whether to confront my parents with how I felt about my childhood or cut them from my life. Then my dad died. With his death, a lot of my own anger about how they'd behaved went. I've been able to be the bigger person with my mum and set her a better example of how to behave, including how I expect her to behave towards me. Our relationship is stronger than it has ever been, and I don't dwell on this event in the same way. I used to be hurt thinking about it. Now I see it as the reactions of angry and scared people to a situation they couldn't control, and resolve to do better myself. My dad always told my brother and I that he was going to have CPS take us away because he hated us. Gotta love those long-term crippling fears of abandonment. My mum does the same thing. She'll tell to my sick dad whilst I'm in the other room crying after an argument where she threatens to kill me that she can't deal with this shit anymore and it needs to go. It's really hurtful. Edit, it's worse because my dad really doesn't care. Has got terminal cancer, which is stressful for all of us, but mostly him, so he just says, well, do it then. Like after has gone he doesn't care what happens to me. When I was around 6 years old, my stepdad woke me up in the night by pulling me out of the bed and yelling that I had got piss on the toilet seat. He took me out on the front porch, and while he was paddling me, the rail I was bracing against broke, and I fell off the porch. My mom used to do the whole waking me up in the middle of the night for some perceived wrongdoing stuff. She would suddenly and loudly throw my door open, turn on the light and drag me out of bed at all hours. I'm pretty sure I'm a light sleeper and regularly wake up startled because of that. I'm 40. I swore I would never do that shit to my kids. Edit, gosh. I don't want to do the cliche Reddit thing, but I honestly didn't expect any attention whatsoever for this comment. Thank you to each person who's responded to this. You all got an upvote from me. It makes me sad to know others have experienced this, or much, much worse. For those who asked, I'm fine aside from the sleep stuff and some pretty intense anxiety that's gotten better with age. I actually have a very good relationship with my mom. We've talked about it over the years and I understand that like many others her age, she is a product of their upbringing. My kids are 20, 14, 13 and 13, and to this day, I have never done that. I am, however, probably a terrible parent in 100 other ways. Kidding. Virtual hugs to you all. I'm 40 and habitually wear shoes at all times, right until I get in bed, because my mom once trapped young, barefoot me in the kitchen with broken glass, so she could beat me at her leisure. My mom said I couldn't have a best friend anymore, because my best friend and I were drawing pentagrams on manuscript paint at our after school program, pretending they were transmutation circles from an anime called Full Metal Alchemist. Pentagrams are much easier for a 9-year-old to draw than an intricate alchemy array. My mom immediately jumped to this being devil worshipping. Despite my friend and I not even knowing what a pentagram really meant. This led to my mom telling every single teacher and after school care worker not to allow me to be anywhere near my friend. Friend moves away and mom won't let me email her to stay in touch. I'm 24 now and haven't had any close friends since. Christina, if you're out there, I still miss you. This made me so sad. I hope you find her one day. Beatings will continue until your moral improv is in all ducking serious. Life got better and I never see my dad anymore and him and my mom ask when I'm having kids and why I haven't seen them in years despite living probably 30 minutes from them. I wish more people realize they can cut toxic people they are related to out of their lives. You can't pick your family, but you can choose to leave. My mum took everything in my room except a blanket, my radio, books, toys, you name it. I was locked in there for the UK summer holidays. They are 6 weeks long. My mum used to beat 10 bells of shit out of, but being locked in that room the whole summer was probably the worst. I was grounded for 6 months straight, which was me being locked in my room, not an actual physical lock, and I wasn't allowed to leave it except for dinner, the bathroom and to go to school. I had zero toys. I owned no books. I had nothing to do but get lost in my head, and at one point my radio was taken away, so I was left in complete silence. I was between 10 to 13. Why was I grounded? My dad thought either my brother or I stole his camera and sold it, and until we told him who did it, we were both grounded. Finally, after 6 months, he finally cleaned his room and found his camera and said we were ungrounded. We never even got an apology. After that, my dad continued to ground me for block of months at a time. I ended up being grounded and isolated for 5 years total between 10 to 13 years old. Being trapped in my head for that long has ducked me up mentally permanently. I'm done reading this thread. Too depressing. My dad holding me up by grabbing my ear and my foot. Lol, my mom broke the cartilage in my ear like this. It turned blackish and hurt when the wind blew. Thought I had an ear infection. She took me to the doctor. Guy says this shit broke. What happened? I hadn't realized what happened until the doctor asked me, and I thought for a few seconds and saw my mother staring at me, and I went I fell. I always thought I just saved this bitch a really awkward situation, lol. Not gonna lie, this shit broke made me laugh. In the 1980s, my father was a radioman and often had spare parts lying around. Whenever I was rebellious toward him, he was fond of whipping my bare back with metal radio antenna. I hope you are in a better place now and are okay after that. I've been hit on the legs with one of those. Ducking hurts. When I was 8 years old, I had every dish in the house thrown at me, including a loaf of bread. I was then locked outside till midnight. I was first put out in the morning. Once I was left out front. 4-year-old me thought, huh, imago over there. They couldn't find me because I was going to the park, down the road, on my own, in the cold. I can't even imagine letting either of my kids, 3 and 5, out of the house on their own. The pointless ones. We had landscaping rocks in our yard from an unfinished project. They were probably 30 pounds each. After a number of other punishments failed, my parents came up with the move rocks punishment. I'd have to move 30 or so of these rocks 50 yards, set them up into a particular shape, square, circle, etc. Closed bracket, comma, have my parents check them and then move them all back. The pointlessness of it all was the worst. Sounds like an AL punishment. They had top. New to this, when I was in year 2, UK, so 6 or 7 years old, I was an unruly child to say the least. I was undiagnosed ADHD. My mum had enough and told me I was getting adopted. I remember distinctively telling classmates I was leaving to live somewhere else. My mum made me tidy my room and take what I wanted in a bag, and I went to my aunt's house, mum's sister, to wait for the lady to pick me up. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, and woke up in my aunt's spare bedroom. She took me to school that day and my mum picked me up, and I went home as if nothing had happened. Years later, I'm in my late 30s now. I brought this up and my mum, She acts like it never happened. Her words exactly were, "You're living in a fantasy. That never happened." So yeah, that had messed with my head quite a bit. That's classic gaslighting, mate. The worst part of my difficult childhood is the complete denial of any of it, and the accusations that I'm mentally ill for suggesting it. That can really duck with you. My mom pulled down my pants and hit me with the brush side of a hairbrush in front of my 3 fellow 5-year-old friends. I was innocent. She didn't believe me. That's rough, buddy. My friend's mom was the smartest woman on earth though. Growing up, she would reward us with a pack of Pokemon cards for completing a list of chores. But if we were being really misbehaved, she would pull out a pack, open it, show us the contents of the pack, and then rip up the cards. The woman ripped up a ducking Charizard in front of 2 10-year-olds and an 8-year-old. We didn't act out much after that devastating blow. I'm not sure if I'm horrified or impressed. I shit my pants in the 4th grade. I don't know why, but I had a condition that made me hold it all in and not use a toilet. This had been going on and off my entire life. Not a problem anymore. My dad was furious. I remember being naked in my bedroom with my dad. My dirty underwear was on the floor and my dad had a hard grip on my arm while he screamed and yelled at me. He yelled at me things like, "How old are you? No one is gonna wanna be your friend and you're disgusting." He then beat me his belt. My dad worked at a flour mill and spent his days stacking 100-pound flour bags 10 high, so he was built like the ducking Hulk. He would then rub my shit-filled underwear in my face, making me look at it and smell it. Pediatric fecal retention syndrome. My daughter has this. It isn't your fault. Edit. For small children/infants over 12 months. Daily use of Restorelax or fiber-based laxative. Older children can use this as well, but are more likely to learn not to use the wrong muscles when defecating. The Restorelax stops the pain/fear cycle as the child learns it won't hurt anymore to go. Basically, the infant begins solid foods. The poo becomes more solid and some constipation is normal at this stage, which is why there is baby pureed prunes to help. However, some babies will posture, looks like masturbating, and may eventually become a masturbation method. Their legs in a rhythmic pattern as they are using the incorrect muscle in the rectum, and are instead holding the poo, usually to try to prevent the poo from coming out and hurting. Or sometimes, just because they figure out the pooing sensation to push incorrectly. This poo then gets bigger and harder because it dries out, causing mega stools, and the body finally forces it out, and they can experience severe pain from this, making the cycle next time worse as they try to prevent it. Diarrhea is also a symptom of constipation. There is functional constipation as well, which is different, but may be related. Now that my daughter is older, 4, she is still on a cap full of Restorelax a day. Pediatrician told to do so. It can't harm her. However, potty training is delayed as she is afraid of anything to do with defecation. What also happens is the parent or doctor or teacher becomes frustrated and may start harsh discipline and punishment for the child not defecating properly, making it an anxiety-related thing. A girl I was babysitting had this. It was already super embarrassing for her. I couldn't imagine berating her for it. I'm so sad for the original commenter. Nobody feels worse about it than the person it happened to. It's just wrong to punish them for it. Got put on restriction for 6 months for doing something my mom said I could do, but then she said she never gave me permission to do, even though another adult was sitting there and confirmed he heard her give me permission to do it. Also had to pick up all the rocks in the vacant lot next to our house and put them in a pile on weekends as part of the punishment. That something was, rode my bicycle to the library. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Reddit videos.